first video, we looked at what we mean by literature and what we mean by great literature, and why it is important for our human formation. In this video, we're going to look at Catholic literature and the Catholic worldview. How a Catholic writer will necessarily have his or her work shaped by the Catholic worldview, regardless of the subject matter of that literature. When I applied for graduate studies at a secular university, graduate studies in English, I almost didn't get in because, as I had gone to a Christian liberal arts school, they assumed that my literary studies must have been limited to the Bible and to trite Christian moral tales. That happens too when people speak of Catholic literature. They assume that it must be a work of literature that primarily treats of Catholic matters, or as Newman puts it, of Catholic doctrine, controversy, history, persons, or politics. But the truth is that Catholic literature, as Newman says, includes all subject of literature whatsoever, treated as a Catholic would treat them, and as he only can treat them. The contemporary American poet Dana Gioia agrees. He writes, "Surprisingly little Catholic imaginative literature is explicitly religious. Even less is devotional. Most of it touches on religious themes indirectly while addressing other subjects, not sacred topics, but profane ones, such as love, war, family, violence, sex, mortality, money, and power. What makes the writing Catholic is that the treatment of these subjects is permeated with a particular worldview." Flannery O'Connor, the famed Southern story writer from the last century, outspokenly Catholic, who has a Catholic character in only one of her many stories, says much the same as Newman and Gioia. Writing in a letter to a friend, she said once that Catholic literature is a Catholic mind looking at anything, including itself. What Newman and Gioia and O'Connor are all expressing is that what makes great Catholic literature Catholic is not some kind of religious content, although it can have religious content, but rather the worldview expressed in the literature, the Catholic worldview of the author. In fact, most great Catholic authors do not write explicitly about religious themes, or if they do not do so in a pious way. What makes their works distinctively Catholic is the way the literature they write expresses or embodies the Catholic worldview. So let's dive a bit deeper into this. What do we mean by the Catholic worldview? What characterizes the Catholic worldview? And what does Catholic literature, if it is not in any way explicitly religious, do or show that sets it apart from other literature? How do we determine whether a work is Catholic? So worldview is a way of looking at the world, at people, at life, a distinct and comprehensive understanding of the world that grounds all of one's thinking. It is, if you will, the lens through which one looks at all of reality. So, for example, a nihilist will have a very dark view of reality. Everything is pointless. Nothing has any meaning. Where a utilitarian will see each thing according to its usefulness. But a Catholic, as a Catholic, has a Catholic worldview. That means he or she will see each thing, person, circumstance, event, indeed all of reality, through this Catholic worldview. Here's a pretty clear definition of that worldview from Dana Gioia. He writes, "Catholic writers tend to see humanity struggling in a fallen world. They combine a longing for grace and redemption with a deep sense of human imperfection and sin. Evil exists, but the physical world is not evil. Nature is sacramental, shimmering with signs of sacred things. Indeed, all of reality is mysteriously charged with the invisible presence of God. Catholics also perceive suffering as redemptive, at least when born in emulation of Christ's passion and death. Catholics also generally take the long view of things, looking back to the time of Christ and the Caesars, while also gazing forward toward eternity. Catholicism is also intrinsically communal, a notion that goes far beyond sitting at Mass with the local congregation, extending to a mystical sense of continuity between the living and the dead. Finally, there is a habit of spiritual self-scrutiny and moral examination of conscience, one source of insouciant Catholic guilt. So one essential aspect of the Catholic worldview is that it is sacramental. that all of reality somehow transmits God's presence to us, if we have eyes and hearts open to perceive His presence. Not that everything is one of the 7 sacraments of the Church, but that through all of reality, God is transmitting to us His presence. The psalmist even tells us the same. He says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The sky proclaims its builder's craft. One day to the next conveys that message. One night to the next imparts that knowledge." The novelist Walter Percy once said that the novelist's greatest assets are what he calls the incarnational and sacramental aspects of Catholic Christianity. Our world today has mostly lost the sacramental sense of reality. Contemporary society tends to see things very horizontally, materialistically. And the materialistic worldview is just that, horizontal, opaque, matter separated from spirit. But the Catholic worldview, the sacramental view, is that the whole universe is sacramental. The Venerable Fulton Sheen once wrote that in the Incarnation, the Son of God revealed that the universe was sacramental. A sacrament, in a very broad sense of the term, combines 2 elements. One visible, the other invisible. One that can be seen or tasted or touched or heard. The other unseen to the eyes of the flesh. There is, however, he writes, some kind of relation or significance between the 2. A spoken word is a sacrament, because there is something material or audible about it. There is also something spiritual about it, namely its meaning. So a sacramental worldview shows that there is a deeper meaning in everything, a manifestation of the invisible world in and through this visible world. And when we think about how Scripture says that God created the world through His Word, Genesis says, "And God said, and there was," then it is easy to see that everything somehow is filled with or transmits something of God's presence and message to us. And it is, Newman tells us, our duty as Christians to see things in this way. He writes, "We are bid to color all things with hues of faith, to see a divine meaning in every event and a superhuman tendency. Even our friends around us are invested with unearthly brightness, no longer imperfect men, but beings taken into divine favor, stamped with His seal, and in training for future happiness." So when a Catholic writes any imaginative literature, poetry, drama, fiction, or memoir, what he or she is writing will naturally be vertical, opening up to other worlds, to deeper truth, expressing something of the presence of God, even if not directly or explicitly. Another key aspect of the Catholic worldview is that we live in a fallen world, a world where things are not as they were created to be, where something is awry, and where something within ourselves is also wrong. So when a Catholic writes, that writing will necessarily convey the sense of humans struggling in this fallen world, something of the need for grace and mercy, the desire for redemption, a deep longing for a fullness and a perfection that we do not yet have. There is always the possibility for redemption, the possibility for healing, for mercy, for a new life, the possibility for transformation. And there is always a drama of free will. Catholic literature depicts the human condition without despair and without false hope, but with fidelity to reality, that we are created good, that we have lost our way, that we are in the middle of a struggle to return to what we were created to be. Percy goes so far as to say that the possibility of the novel was born when Christ became incarnate. That is to say, the incarnation, which gives absolute importance to the historical event of a specific person living in a specific time and place, has created the kind of ethos which is required for writing novels, for taking seriously the story of concrete persons set in particular times and places. And always, the Catholic novelist must create characters who are believable, not perfectly pious people that seem to be porcelain figures in a tacky Catholic catalog, but real people, people struggling to find the path to redemption. Some might argue that the Catholic worldview is limiting to the Catholic writer, or somehow reductive, but it's quite the opposite. As Flannery O'Connor puts it, the novelist is required to create the illusion of a whole world with believable people in it, and the chief difference between the novelist who is an Orthodox Christian and the novelist who is merely a naturalist is that the Christian novelist lives in a larger universe. He believes that the natural world contains a supernatural, and this doesn't mean that his obligation to portray the natural is less. It means it is greater. The fact is that, writing from a Catholic worldview, the Catholic author can write about anything and about anyone. And if he or she is any good at their craft, that writing will be deeper, more profound, more capable of conveying the reality of the human condition. And thus the characters will be more complete and more compelling, without any need to be pious or reductive. Let's take as an example Tolkien's masterpiece, The Lord of the Rings, the trilogy about the struggle to free Middle-earth from the tyranny of Sauron. None of the characters are what we tend to think of as religious. There is no mention of church, of worship, of scripture, of the sacraments. There is no moment of preaching, no moralizing. There is simply the immense story of the hobbits and dwarves, the men and the elves, the withers and the orcs, the ringwraith and Sauron, the drama of friendship and fellowship, of temptation and fall, of betrayal and redemption, of brokenness and healing, of division and order. His whole created world, the world of Middle-earth, is not limited by his Catholic worldview, but rather broadened and expanded by it. The plants have healing properties. The ring is not evil in itself, but poses a power too heavy for most to bear. Elves give bread that is strength for the journey. Mysterious powers taken and used for selfish purposes, both for oneself and for the world, corrupt the heart and turn one in on himself. And yet redemption is always possible for each individual and for the whole world. The Lord of the Rings has captivated readers and now viewers since it was first published, not because it is a narrow tale or a particularly religious one, but because it resonates with our experience and opens us up to the world, opens our eyes to the reality beyond what we see at first glance. So when Catholics write literature, when they write good literature, that is, they engage in the evangelization of the world, even when they never explicitly speak of Christ. What do I mean by this? I mean that good literature, written from a Catholic worldview, has the power to connect the heart of the reader with his or her deepest longings, the power to open the reader's eyes to the deeper truth of reality, the power to proclaim the gospel or some aspect of it, not some handy-headed attempt to proselytize or even to allegorize, but simply by telling a story in a way that is true to reality. If this material world is sacramental, if it is charged with the presence of God, as the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins once wrote, then good literature is also sacramental, charged with the presence of God, even if he is never mentioned, enticing readers to open their eyes and their hearts to the reality beyond the surface. Good Catholic literature, then, even without the author actually intending it, prepares the soil of the heart for the explicit proclamation of the gospel, preparing the reader to see things as they are, to see beyond the surface of nature, to be open to the supernatural, to see through the window of this world to the truth of all that is. Some questions for sharing in your circle. Number 1, how would you describe your own worldview as a Catholic? How do you see that worldview playing out in your daily life? Number 2, reading the Gioia quote on the handout, what aspects of the Catholic worldview are you most aware of in your own way of seeing the world? What aspects have you seen in imaginative literature that you have read? And number 3, Newman says that we are supposed to see everything with hues of faith. What things in your life or in the world is it easy for you to see in this way? What is it difficult for you to see in this way?